or I can just, skip the formalities of it all and just say, welcome to the Ward 5 NPA. We really appreciate you all coming out, both returning to more and more in person, which is nice. It's good to see a few more faces in person. I was hoping to make it there, but my house is still a little betwixt and between. But thank you all for coming out. We've got a really great agenda today. I'm going to introduce what we do as a ward, as an NPA in general, but I'll do that in a minute. The first section of this meeting is going to be public forum, where people who are here can share their thoughts on anything and everything. And why don't we get started with that, and then I can kind of jump in to the spiel of what we are in one minute once I get my nice script in front of me. So if anybody has anything they want to talk about at public forum, this would be a great moment for that while I get my script. And if you're participating on Zoom, feel free just to use the raise hand function and we can promote you if anybody wants to share anything.
So number one is what, public forum?
I can email it to you.
Pardon?
I can email it to you. That'd be easier.
No, because I said, so next to public forum, I go like 00 to 2 minutes and 22 seconds. So you have public forum.
Billy, I just emailed you a minute ago, but if that's not working out,
just got it. I'm going to start sharing my screen with it. Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
Your city councilor.
Wonder if Sam is the blue torso in the room. Could you promote Nancy to the panel? She's on the steering committee now. So
All right.
I just put that in my name, so I just put SC in my name to make that a little bit easier to figure out.
That is a
You have to
very
know
smart
100 names.
That is a very smart idea, Joe. Okay, great. All right, can people now see the shared screen with our lovely logo?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so this is the Ward 5 NPA March meeting. And what is the Neighborhood Planning Assembly? These are our guiding principles. We are a safe space. We provide a welcoming forum for all those in Ward 5 and beyond who want to talk about the issues affecting us in our community. We are accessible. We engage with all community members and we seek to minimize barriers to participation. This is why we're so excited to finally get our in-person back a bit. I'm really glad to see people there. We are respectful. We respect all cultural and economic, we look for cultural and economic awareness, and we value diverse perspectives. We believe we are vital. We are a fun and creative organization. And importantly, we are nonpartisan. We do not endorse political candidates. We are here for a free-ranging discussion of all who want to be involved without a partisan viewpoint. You can bring a partisan viewpoint if you want, but we ourselves are not. This is, I believe, this may be a slightly older list of our steering committee. We've had a little bit of turnover, as we'll get to in our agenda coming up. There's some open spots on the steering committee, which is this group of us who structure the Ward 5 NPA. Here's some information you can find about us. We have a website, and thank you to CETO and to CCTV for providing access to tonight and all of our meetings. And yes, we will be using the Zoom webinar format for those of you who are participating remotely. So as I've said before, if you want to participate, just use the raise hand function, and we will then, you can then unmute yourself. You'll be promoted to presenter. You can then unmute and start your video if you want to participate via Zoom in any of our sections, including public forum. This is the old agenda because I wasn't able to update this, but I will share my screen with the new agenda shortly.
But you jogged my memory. I have an NPA business question.
Oh, there we go.
So I saw a news article recently about some turnover at the city in the REIB, racial inclusion and belonging, equity, inclusion and belonging office. Looks like Pitt is the new director of that. So Sam, do we have a new NPA supervisor? Or are we still figuring that out downtown?
I believe we are looking at candidates soon. It's open, but yeah, Pitt is the new. She wasn't supposed to be, but she is now the new interim head of REIB right now. So yeah, there will be a new supervisor later on, but not right now. It's just me, basically, for you guys.
That works. You're doing a good job. I just saw that we had her name on the list and this older document at least, and yeah, reminded me of it. Thanks.
Well, great. So yeah, so this is now public forum. We really would, anyone who wishes to talk can. I can kick things off if we want to. I will just say that I am so grateful today for the beautiful weather that we had on this first really amazingly spring day, and it was a great moment of being out in the park with all a bunch of kids from the daycare in Ward 5 after school today, and just was nice to start to see some smiling faces coming back out in the neighborhood. We're definitely looking to keep getting people back together in this. I'm not going to ever say beyond COVID era, but in the era in which we are in now. So just wanted to share that perspective. And if anybody has any issues they want to bring up, now would be the time. And I see Andy has raised his hand using the raised hand function. So Andy, go right ahead.
I'm Andy Simon. I am on the steering committee, also on Ward 5. And I wanted to point out to people, if you hadn't noticed it, that we had announced in Front Porch Forum that anyone wearing green to the meeting tonight, either virtually or in person, would be entered into a drawing at the end of the meeting for a gift card, a $25 gift card. We're going to raffle off 2 of them. So if you're wearing your green, let it be known, make it obvious, turn on your camera. And Nate, when he gets here, will be noting who's wearing green, and you can be on that list, on that very relatively small list. I mean, how many other raffles do you do that where there are only 15 people that are in the pool?
Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, that's a good.
Unfortunately, I don't think anybody on the steering committee qualifies, because that's
Way better than for
unseemly.
All right, fine.
Now, Andy, I'm not wearing green, but I am wearing my James Joyce t-shirt. Does that qualify?
Close.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, although it disqualifies me as a steering.
You're disqualified
Yeah.
though, right? I have something for public forum. Hey folks, my name is Nate. I'm also on the steering committee, and it's kind of a public service announcement. I know that it's been a pretty strange economic time for a lot of folks, and I just am kind of raising the awareness about 2 programs that exist, one for renters and one for homeowners. That's it's just some COVID relief money that exists that has actually relatively high thresholds for people to get qualified for. I work with folks through housing counseling a lot, and most people don't think that they would qualify. But we're getting a shutdown notice on our screen. But that won't distract me from the point. The programs are called the VRAP program for renters. It's an emergency rental assistance program, and the homeowners assistance program for homeowners. They can be pretty significant economic benefits that folks can get. I think the homeowner assistance program can pay up to $30,000 in mortgage payments or property taxes in arrears or owed from past years. So I know with the assessment that happened, a lot of folks were kind of scrambling with the tax bill. If you or someone you don't think will be able to make a payment or is behind in any way, or it just needs to think about paying different bills at that time. It's a really great program, and I would recommend all folks apply. And you can find more information at CVOEO about those. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nate. That's super helpful. And from what you just said, it sounds like, so it's for both rental assistance, but then it would also be for property owners if they were also facing challenges.
Yeah, there's two programs, one for renters called the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and one for homeowners called the Homeowners Assistance Program. Slightly different, but both residence types are taken care of.
Great. Well, I will give it one more minute for public forum, and then we will transition into our next agenda item. But once it hits 7:15, we will go over to our new topic, unless anybody has anything else they would like to raise.
This is Andy again. I just have a technical question, mostly for people in the room. Is there a way to zoom in some on the people who are speaking in the room? Or I wondered if we had been doing that before. I wondered if we could still do that.
This is Charlie from CCTV.
Mhm.
So actually, that is kind of a problem today because of an equipment situation. So I'll probably zoom it in a little bit more, but I'm not going to be able to maneuver the camera very much today. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Charlie.
All right. Well, seeing no other hands raised, I'm just going to do one last double check. Yep. We will. Oh, there's good. That's how I can see whether there's any hand raised, and there are none. We will move on to our next agenda item, which is our steering committee pitch to join the steering committee. We are going to have elections at our next meeting, right? I believe it's our next meeting. We'll be doing that for at least 2 seats. Other steering committee members, I believe 2 seats will be open on the steering committee. And I guess there will be all of us who are steering committee members will also be running for our seats, but there's some vacancies right now where we are absolutely looking for other people from Ward 5 to come in and help make this program tick. We've had some great people on it who have recently transitioned into other public service roles, including our new city councilor and school board member, who we're very excited to hopefully hear from later tonight. But it's a great way to get involved in your neighborhood, to get to know people, to give back. I've really enjoyed it. I've been on the steering committee now for 2 years. And so it's been great. It's been so nice to work with everyone on it as a steering committee member and to, force yourself to come to the meetings and get involved in local issues. It's very low time commitment effort. You can make of it what you will. There's, you come once a month to the meetings. We also have a steering committee meeting that we do usually the week after the monthly meeting. And we have some, initiatives and engagement efforts that we do, more long-term, but it is not an overwhelming amount of work and it's very rewarding work. So that's my pitch. If any of the other steering committee members want to chime in with their view on it, feel free to. But yeah.
Billy,
Thanks,
how do you
Billy.
make your interest known if you want to be on the steering committee?
That is a very good question that sounds like you're setting me up for an easy answer that I don't immediately have in front of me. Well, how do you make it known, Andy?
I think there are several ways, actually. You can email the Ward 5 NPA Google group or probably any member of the steering committee and let them know that you're interested in being a candidate for the election next month when we have the election. Or you can just show up at the meeting next month and declare your candidacy, even nominate yourself. So I think that those are really the 2 ways. In the past, when we've had lots of people who are interested and a lot more people that interested than seats, we actually ask for little blurbs from people and publish those ahead of time. But I think if we start getting a lot of interest in the intervening month, I think we might do something like that. But in the meantime, if you think you're interested or if you have questions, write to the Ward 5 NPA Google group and ask questions or declare your interest, and we'll be in touch with you.
And
And
I think
that-
that email address is probably on the agenda or at npa5.org. Just go to the what about us page. But
yes,
it has an underscore in it. Should I read it? And Ward 5 NPA underscore BTB at googlegroups.com. That's a lot of typing, so I recommend cutting and pasting.
and I also recommend just emailing any of us directly and we'll share it with the group. Any of the steering committee members, all of our contact information is on the npa5.org website and also on our city's website for Ward 5 NPA. So there's lots of different ways and feel free to reach out. And again, it's a very rewarding experience.
You can always check the npa5.org website for more pictures of my kids and dogs. Maybe you guys can submit some photos next month.
Is a great idea, Joe.
So Andy, we are running pretty well ahead of schedule with a not as lively public forum, although still very nice, points raised by all. Do you want to get going with your presentation now, or do you want to, we can also find some other things to do for the next 10 minutes?
No, absolutely. We can go. Thank you.
Great.
I did want to announce, I've been in touch with Tiff Bloomley and Gabrielle Stebbins, and they are nailed down on the floor of the House tonight and most likely won't be able to do an update. It's, if by some miracle they show up, then we'll do it, but we may end earlier than planned just because of that. I just wanted to announce that. So yes, let's start. Thank you. This is Andy Simon again, and I'm here with Ruby Perry. We live on Locust Street across from Callahan Park. And we want to talk to you about the Pine Street Barge Canal. We're going to do a brief presentation and then we would welcome questions about the Barge Canal. So let me share my screen here. Here we go. So since this is Ward 5, we assume that many, if most of you already know the Barge Canal, having walked or skated there over the years. But this map just helps you orient to where the Barge Canal is. So we're all talking about the same thing. This is a 28-acre site, including wetlands, forested land, and water, west of Pine Street, directly north of Burlington Electric. You may have seen parts of it. You've probably seen parts of it from the bike path or from the driveway at Myers Bagels. It helps to have some historical context to understand the complex story of the Barge Canal. Before the mid-19th century, this was all wetlands, a transitional zone between the growing city of Burlington and Lake Champlain. It was a fishing, hunting, and gathering place for indigenous people and early Euro-American residents of Burlington. So this is pre-1850s. The big change that happened, the first big ecological change, was the coming of the railroad, the completion of the Rutland and Burlington Railroad track in 1849. This map helps you see the whole site, but also the railroad coming across the top between the Barge Canal area and Lake Champlain. It pretty much cut off the connection between the Barge Canal and the lake. We're going to come back to this aerial photo in a minute. So in the second half of the 19th century, it was the lumber industry that dominated Burlington. Once Vermont's forests were depleted, much of the wood that was milled here came in on sailing barges down the lake from Quebec. As the industry grew, the wetlands were filled in with sawdust and wood chips. To keep the mills supplied all winter, more storage space was needed. To that end, lumber baron Lawrence Barnes had a canal excavated into the filled wetlands with a drawbridge to cross the railroad tracks. This is from an 1887 drawing of a map of Burlington. But the lumber industry declined in the 1890s, so another industry sprang up on the Barge Canal, a manufactured gas plant that ran on Pennsylvania coal, shipped in on coal barges, and later by the railroad. The Burlington Gas Light Company on Pine Street supplied coal gas to households and businesses from 1908 to 1966. So 60 years of manufactured gas production. Making gas from coal was a dirty business. The coal tar saturated wood chips and other waste products were dumped out back in the wetlands and the disused lumber storage areas. In the 1970s and 80s, with growing environmental consciousness, the newly created EPA took control of the Barge Canal area as a federal Superfund site. They identified 56 contaminants of concern in the soil and water, including various hydrocarbons and heavy metals. In 1998, after a long and sometimes contentious process, the EPA issued its record of decision on the Barge Canal. It was decided to cap the coal tar on the bottom of the canal and essentially leave the land alone, with reviews every 5 years and regular monitoring of soil and groundwater contaminants. So back to this map, here's the situation now. After this time of not being disturbed, the trees and plants have grown back. Some natives like cottonwood and red osier dogwood, others considered invasives like buckthorn and phragmites. Beavers, herons, ducks, geese populate the wetlands. The major contaminants in the undisturbed land have, according to the EPA, largely remained stationary. This is the current zoning map of the Barge Canal area. The yellow line delineates the federal Superfund boundary. The green line shows land that's currently in RCO conservation zoning. Some of that is owned by the city, some of it is private. The two parcels that are marked 453 and 501 Pine Street are private and currently for sale, targeted for redevelopment. Ruby, you're muted. Ruby, can't hear you.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I just found it disappeared. I'll be. Okay, here's where we started our campaign to conserve and remediate the Barge Canal. On a cold day in mid-November 2021, we gathered with friends and neighbors to consider how much the Barge Canal has done to heal itself and protect the lake. With debris from the land, late flowers and herbs from our gardens, and paintings of mushrooms and birds, we created this collective offering of our gratitude. On that day, in a very real way, we committed ourselves to caring for this land. There are many, many reasons to conserve and care for the Barge Canal site. So we'll take a short drone tour of the area while we discuss them. The most obvious benefit to Burlington is a healthy, functioning wetlands habitat in the middle of the south end, home to mammals, birds, insects, plants, fungi, and microbes. The living Barge Canal protects the lake by providing flood control for the south end and helps the city manage its stormwater runoff. It stabilizes the soil, which is containing and slowly transforming the toxins left over from industry. The living Barge Canal sequesters carbon, creates climate resilience, and nature-based solutions to climate disruption. The Barge Canal also has the potential to remind us of our history, indigenous, natural, and industrial history. At this point, the city of Burlington owns 11 acres in the center of the Barge Canal land, purchased decades ago in preparation for construction of the Southern Connector Highway. The rest is privately held. The small private parcels along the railroad track are wetlands and are already zoned for conservation. This conservation land is where our regeneration work can begin immediately. And we will begin this spring to care for the land. There is extensive debris from decades of neglect at the Barge Canal. We've already begun planning a Green Up Day cleanup on May 7th, so mark your calendars. Starting in April, there'll be a citizen science project to inventory the plants and animals on the public land. Non-native buckthorn has taken over large parts of the site along the canal, and native polycultures need to be planted and nurtured. We are envisioning the site as a forested parkland, perhaps a botanical garden of diverse native species. We imagine the Barge Canal as a center for education with interpretive pathways to learn about our natural history, the indigenous presence on the land, as well as the obvious industrial history embodied there. We imagine it as a research and training ground for scientists, a living laboratory for much needed cold climate bioremediation research. A UVM class in plant and soil sciences has already designed their semester's project there, and there are multiple professors and scientists that are interested in working there in that land. A wildlands park could offer safe public access to boardwalks and a possible route through to the bike path. Ideally, we see the land already under conservation expanding to include the private land at the Barge Canal. Through all of this, we're exploring the idea of rematriation of the land, opening to its original inhabitants for ritual and traditional uses by entering into partnership with our Abenaki neighbors. We have been active these last few months. Our main strategy has been to learn as much as we can about the Barge Canal and get as many people aware and involved as possible. I'm going to go through this list. So we consulted with Indigenous elders and leaders. We launched a petition, 576 signers and counting. We talked with city boards and commissions, provided information to City Council. We had discussions with CEDO, with the EPA, with Vermont DEC. We've had discussions with land trusts. We've engaged with private landowners. We've worked with UVM students and teachers, made contact with Vermont environmental groups, held pop-up events on Pine Street, talked to our South End residents and leaders, presented at NPAs. You can help. Your voice is essential in conserving and remediating this land. And now is the time to get involved, to develop your own relationship with the Barge Canal. Visit the Barge Canal, walk around on that land, write your city councilor, speak at public input sessions on South End rezoning, talk to neighbors and friends, show up for pop-up events like this one, participate in citizen science projects, which will be coming up starting in April. Sign the petition. We send regular updates out to petition signers. We have a Facebook page and a nascent website. We need help with all aspects of the campaign. The city of Burlington needs to be a partner in this effort to help with the active regeneration of the land, including cleaning it up as well as restoring and protecting the natural ecosystem. In order for this to happen, the city government needs to hear from Burlington residents that they care about the Barge Canal. These will be included in the minutes. Or you can contact us directly by email and we'll send you all the links. We see this brownfield transitioning with our care into a greenfield. Our vision for conserving the Barge Canal land is a paradigm shift, a different way of thinking about development and open land and about our responsibility to clean up after ourselves, a different way of thinking about our relationship to our home. We'll leave you with a poem by Judy Dow, an Abenaki elder and educator.
the words in Judy's poem, gypsies and pirates, were derogatory terms used by some people in Burlington in the past for Abenaki and French Canadians. This is the Canal Barge by Judy Dow. A little inlet where one goes to seek refuge, home to the ancient ones, big and small. Gypsies sell their ash baskets to those going by, while pirates dock their barges for a temporary home. Lumber stored in piles mountains high brought red flames, hot and smoky tones of gray throughout the sky. A cemetery for 3 barges wide and long, skeletons from a time long ago sit side by side with a schooner, while bare bones of others sink deep in the mud, their silhouettes outlined in the archaeological reports. The basin dredged and filled over and over again, protected by breakwaters today, the canal stands calm. Sealed shut until 1961, an opening was made for barges to once again enter where they sat abandoned. Along came the Burlington Gaslight Company, the beautiful wetlands filled to their top with coal tar. Years of abuse left behind a huge Superfund site. The wetland plants fight to survive, hanging in there for another day, but they can't do it alone. They need our help. Our feet have led us there and back many times, leaving only footprints behind. We've watched nature struggle along the canal for far too long. Those that have benefited from this land need to remember now. That's a poem by Judy Dow. So it's time for questions. What questions can we answer about the Pine Street Barge Canal and conserving and remediating it? Hi, Winnie.
Bye. Bye, hi. What about the bye, hi? The bye, hi.
Questions?
I pressed.
I was going to
something.
ask a question, Andy. So I know that there are some plots for sale right now. What position? So your hope is that is purchased by the city or is donated, or is there a particular vision you have for those plots that are currently for sale?
It's a longer discussion probably, and Scott Mapes, who represents the owner, Rick Davis, of those 2 plots, is here tonight. But we have been in discussion with Scott and Rick about potentially finding a way to acquire that land. There is a plan, as we understand it, there is a plan to develop it at this point, and negotiations going on. Our hope is that if that does not happen, that we can find a way with the help of land trusts and other sources of funds to acquire the land and include it into the conservation zone. And in fact, our discussions with Rick over the last few months have indicated that he was fine with a conservation use of the land as long as he was able to sell it. So we'll see what happens. In the meantime, we're focused on the land that's already in conservation zoning, which includes those 11 acres that the city owns and other parcels along the railroad track on the other side of the water that are owned by Rick Davis and by Russ Scully. And there is some indication, since those aren't really usable for any kind of development and they're in conservation zoning, that those will be donated to the conservation land.
Thank you.
Can we touch that?
Other questions? We're also glad to answer questions after the meeting. You can contact us at sosburlington@gmail.com or you can contact me directly or Ruby, and we're happy to continue the discussion and answer questions as they come up.
Andy, I have one other question. Oh, Joe's got a question. I'll let him go ahead. Sorry.
Question might be better. I just wanted to thank you for bringing that research, concerning how it looked when there was lumber there, or just at least a drawing of it, and the current way that all the land is laid out. I'm sure that you could find that on your own, but it's nice to have that laid out in front of us to kind of understand what we're looking at, how closely the contamination sort of backs up to those properties. Because I had been wondering, how deep they were from the road, and given that there is kind of a need for housing in the general area, maybe it doesn't have to be right there, but that's another place where housing could be built. Unless it's truly problematic from a EPA standpoint to have any living space there. That was a few things that I had kind of wondered about when the petition was initially being circulated. I didn't really understand very well what all the considerations around that were for the site. So maybe you have a better idea of it now. Thanks for sharing.
The indications so far from Scott and Rick are that the development that the developer that they've been talking to is not talking about building housing there. There are some problematic parts of housing on the Barge Canal, well, housing on a Superfund site or a brownfield, that initially there are restrictions, there are grant restrictions and what they call institutional controls on that land on both of those parcels, and have been since 1998, prohibiting residential development and childcare centers because of the potential risk for people living there or young children. So, there would have to be a lot of discussion and also some regulatory changes to have housing there, but it doesn't seem like that's where it's headed right now. Other questions?
Yeah, thanks for speaking to that.
I just want to say that, in terms of the history, there is so much history connected to this land, some of it ancient history, some of it much more recent, including the original EPA plan in 1992, which was presented to the city of Burlington, which was to scoop up all of the contaminated soil on the site and create this 13-acre, 25-foot high toxic waste dump right down by the lake, and a containment vessel. That was the original remediation proposal. And basically the city of Burlington, the residents of Burlington, elected officials, and pretty much everybody rose up and said, no, that's not going to happen. And the EPA, for the first time in their history, withdrew a proposed remedy. And also for the first time in their history, they created a council of local residents, scientists, business owners, and responsible parties, people who were responsible for the pollution, and worked for 5 years operating on consensus and came up with the ultimate remedy that was accepted by the EPA, with a pretty extraordinary bit of sort of fairly recent history of Burlington.
And I want to say also that we skimmed over the role that the Barge Canal plays in the Burlington stormwater abatement, and how important that is. It figures pretty heavily into what happens to water when it comes down the hill and crosses over Pine Street. And anything that is built there would have to take that into consideration and would actually have to duplicate what the Barge Canal land is doing already on its own. It would have to be some, technological, overriding of the land's natural tendencies. And so it just in so many ways makes sense to pay attention to what the land is already doing and to acknowledge that. And when we looked at that land through Judy Dow's eyes as a Beneke elder and actually a resident from long time in Burlington, to read the land with us, that is the one remaining functioning wetlands in the South End.
Other questions, discussion? How are we doing on time? We're probably reached our limit.
Yeah, well, actually, I think we're still doing okay on time. And so I think our next one's supposed to go at 7:50, so we've got some additional time. One question I have, Andy, is I'm assuming that the canal, is not a naturally occurring phenomenon. Again, was the wetlands before it. Would there be any benefit to trying to revert the canal back to more wetlands, or is it because of what sort of stuff is in there, it's better just to leave it lie at this point? Or what efforts could be made additionally once under conservation to like the actual canal part itself? Like I vaguely recall there being like sunken barges even in the canal itself and those sort of things, so just curious about that.
There are sunken barges, and the way that was negotiated so that they didn't have to be excavated and disturb the bottom of the canal was that it was agreed that there would be an excavation of another canal barge that was in the lake and restore it. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum did that. As to your question, we do have some experts on the call who probably could answer this better than I. But I think that the general feeling about the water in the Barge Canal was a lot of the coal tar was in the bottom of the canal, and that while it was capped with a sand cap and other several different times over the last 20 years, it probably is better to let the wetlands sort of reclaim it rather than try to actively go in and try to do that. And they are. I mean, if you go back there either in the wintertime or looking at it from the railroad tracks, you see that it is a very active wetland. There's a big beaver lodge, a couple of beaver lodges, and you'll see all sorts of animal tracks if you go there in the wintertime. And there's a lot of bird activity back there. So there's a lot going on back there already in terms of an active wetland.
Andy, I
Ann
just
had-
wanted to direct it to Anne had a question, so I just wanted to pass the floor over to her.
Well, I'm always curious to know how people in the community can help in the effort and to get the word out besides signing the petition. But what you were talking about just now raises questions in my mind. Aren't there certain special considerations for how you would even build on that land? I understand because of the contamination of the soil that it's almost like you got to like build on pilings in a way, right? I'd like to hear someone talk a little bit more about just the sort of the challenges of developing land that's already contaminated without spreading it farther.
There have been plans. There have been pretty detailed plans in the past to build an office building. There was a plan to build a supermarket in the past. All of them, I think, were based on the idea of just that, putting pilings down to bedrock, because the land is largely peat and fill, and so both for the stability of a building, but also for the possibility of the weight of a building spreading that the contaminants in the soil. Excuse me. That has been the plan, and I imagine that any building that might get built there would have to follow that plan. In terms of how people can get involved, sorry, we're going to be much more active in the next little while with our website will be up, our Facebook page, and I think it's important for people to come to. Samantha and Megan are going to do a presentation, and it seems like other people from the South End are going to do a presentation on South End rezoning possibilities, to actively engage in those discussions that are given for public input. And in terms of the Barge Canal, speaking up for, not just for conserving the private land, which is, a different kind of negotiation, but for really putting city energy and city resources into conserving the public land and the conserved land. That's where the city needs to hear from us. And also, I want to reiterate what Ruby said about Green Up Day, we're going to do a big Green Up project at the Barge Canal on Saturday, May 7th. And there's tons of debris down there from old houseless encampments and various other sort of dumpings that have been left there. And we're going to get
over the decades of stuff. Nothing has been taken care of. And that's essential in terms of restoring that land and restoring the ecosystem and beginning to care for the land that has, that is just an essential part of the work that needs to happen. And I think it's worth mentioning that we talked about all those people that we talked with in the city. We have not found any support in the city for this idea. So I think it's going to take the public will to put that bug in their ear that this is something that's important to the city, that we do recognize the role that the Barge Canal plays already and how important it is to not cover it with pavement and with a building or two.
And with that said, over to you, Megan and Samantha. Thank you very much for having us tonight.
Thank you.
And giving us time.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much, and thank you all for the presentation. That was very, very interesting. So yes, as Andy just previewed, we are about to we're coming up on 7:50. Yep, perfect. So it is now time for Samantha Dunn from CEDO to do the presentation on the Enterprise Innovation rezoning proposal in the South End. And I believe that we have Samantha on Zoom. There you are. Great. How are you doing tonight?
Here, and actually Megan, I'm here with Megan Tuttle, who is going to take the lead on the presentation tonight.
Excellent. Megan, are you
Hey,
there?
everyone. I am just working on getting my screen up here. And because even though we've been doing this for so long, I still somehow have not figured out how to present a PowerPoint effectively in Zoom. I'm going to do this kind of the low tech way. So thanks for having us here. My name is Megan Tuttle. I'm the planning director for the city of Burlington. I'm also a Ward 7 resident, and really glad to be here with you all tonight. Samantha Dunn is here, as Billy noted. She is also with the city. She's the assistant director for community works in CEDO. And we also have our brand new planner, Charles Dillard, here with us. He's listening in tonight. And I know it looked like the video for the folks that are in the Pine Street building also include some of your South End neighbors and some of the property owners and people that run businesses in the South End that we've been talking to about this project as well. So John Kahlo and Steve Conant looks like are there and can help us answer questions as well. As I think Andy and Ruby kind of teed up for us, we're here to talk to you tonight about some work that the city has been doing on some of the neighboring properties around the Barge Canal, actually. We're going to share some initial information with you to start the conversation about a potential zoning amendment that would create an innovation district within a part of the South End. A key question that has been part of the work that we have started has really been about looking at some of the large surface parking lots and other underutilized sites that are along Lakeside Avenue and parts of Pine Street, and looking for opportunities for us to re-envision this part of the South End to help enhance the kind of spirit and identity of the South End neighborhood. Help us create new space for jobs, for the creative makers that are working in the South End, and to even potentially include some new homes, some opportunities for new homes. And much like what Andy and Ruby were saying about the Barge Canal area in particular, we are also looking for opportunities to use this opportunity to re-envision these sites to increase the area's environmental and economic resilience. We're talking about this in the context of many kind of interrelated issues and opportunities that are happening in the city and in the South End. In particular, the work that we're doing right now to consider an enterprise zoning or an innovation district within the South End was part of the 10-point housing action plan that the mayor announced in December of last year. There were a wide range of initiatives that were part of that housing action plan to address a number of housing challenges the city's experiencing. But this one specifically targeted us with, or tasked us with looking at the opportunity for zoning to enable some new developments within this area and to potentially allow housing as part of that. This is really related, as I said, to a lot of different issues that we're dealing with as a community. And while we might be talking about a zoning amendment in just a part of the South End, it's really related to a lot of the broader work that the city and many others are doing as it relates to the housing challenges that we are experiencing in Burlington, in the region, in the state. This has an impact not only on our community as a whole, but also on, folks who are living and working in the South End and folks who want to be living and working in the South End. So we recognize that this conversation is really about how we find an opportunity for some of these sites that currently aren't utilized or aren't utilized very well to support that key missing piece of the South End, which is to have places for people to work and live close to each other, or more places is the case in your neighborhood. We're also talking and working with a lot of people around the ways that this zoning amendment relates to other complementary tools to help us achieve some of the goals in the South End that the community and the city and others have had for a long time. Things like, looking for opportunities to expand artist and maker space in the South End. Talking about tools that could be utilized to help promote some of that brownfield protection, remediation, cleanup that Ruby and Andy were talking about, as well as other types of new public infrastructure that we've long hoped to be able to improve and add within that area of the city, as well as looking at opportunities for places like the Barge Canal or other areas of the South End to provide access to open spaces and visual and physical connections to the lake as well. So when we talk about the possibility of a new innovation zoning district, this is the sort of central area that we have started talking about. We're looking roughly at the properties that are located west of Pine Street between Howard and Sears Lane. And as I've said a couple of times now, really focusing on the large properties that have large surface parking lots and other kind of otherwise undeveloped areas of this kind of central part of the South End Enterprise District. And I think that this is really exciting also to be talking about this because in the Plan BTV South End process that many of you I'm sure participated in many years ago, this idea of an innovation district, this hub of jobs and creative activity and all sorts of community activities in the South End was really envisioned as an innovation district, really centered around this area of Lakeside. So looking at the potential of an innovation zoning district gives us the opportunity to look at how to help bring a lot of those ideas to life through setting the stage with our zoning ordinance to help facilitate future developments. This area of the city is part of the Enterprise Light Manufacturing Zoning District. Some of you may be familiar with this zoning district, but if you're not, this map on the right side of the screen, this sort of peach or brown colored zoning district that runs all the way from the soda plant to Queen City Park Road is the area that we're talking about, the enterprise zone. Sometimes you might hear us call it the ELM if we're using jargon. But this zoning district is kind of the core of the South End's business district, and where you have seen much of the activity related to artists and makers, breweries, The new hula facility is located in this zoning district, all the way down to, Burton and Edland and the GMT facility on Industrial Parkway. So it spans a big part of the south end and includes a lot of different types of activities today. This part of the city has also been evolving a lot, as I'm sure many of you know. The types of businesses that are calling this district home have been evolving a lot over the years. Andy did a great job of describing some of the history of how this area in our industrial history was used for a lot of manufacturing purposes, and how many of those buildings continue to be used today for new types of businesses, continuing to produce and make things, but more often, food, beverage, art, and other types of uses. So this zoning district really allows for that wide range of activity to happen all the way from the north end to the south end. And one thing that we do know from the conversations that we've been having with the community and with businesses in that area is that the north end and the middle and the south end of this zoning district have evolved to have sort of individual unique identities. So even though the zoning district doesn't specifically acknowledge those different types of identities, we've seen that happening organically. And from time to time, the city and our city's planning commission in particular have heard about some of the challenges that we have this large zoning district that treats that whole area the same, and have often heard questions about how we could fine tune the zoning in the ELM district to help kind of facilitate and preserve and protect certain identities in different parts of that district, as well as to help continue to facilitate its evolution. So really, when we're talking about this sort of central area that you can see here as a potential innovation district, this is one of those opportunities that we have to help us kind of get it right in terms of what are the types of commercial uses and industrial or maker uses we might want to see there, as well as, if housing is to be located there, in what way would we be interested in having housing located there? I mentioned at the beginning that our exploring this concept of an innovation zoning district is related to several other efforts that are happening either on the city's part or others in a similar area at the same time. So just want to mention a couple of those things right now. You'll hear more about this in the very near term, but one of those related efforts is to look at the feasibility specifically on two properties within the sort of southern corner of this innovation district area. One of the long-term goals that the city has had, and I'm sure many of you probably remember, is to have some sort of a transportation or transit facility that would be located within the south end, and potentially as part of development that would include other types of uses. So one of the parcels here that is outlined on the map is a privately owned parcel, and the other is a city-owned parcel. And there will be some work done here in the near term to look at the opportunities for some development to occur in that area on those two properties that would help to facilitate a potential transit facility and other types of development. So be on the lookout for some information about a kickoff meeting and other opportunities to provide some input on draft concepts that study will explore. I don't need to spend a lot of time talking about brownfield cleanup. I think Andy and Ruby did a really great job talking about the history of the Barge Canal and the area around the Barge Canal. And, there's certainly a lot more information out there that we could get into. But I did just want to touch on the fact that, we know that the properties that are neighbors of the Barge Canal and some of the properties that are included in the area that might be part of an innovation district are either brownfield sites or have some sort of a development control on them. As Andy mentioned, institutional controls is what we typically call them, that cause us to provide a higher level of scrutiny about new development within these areas, which is a good thing. These conditions don't mean that these sites can never be developed, but it does mean that any future use of them actually has to, one, be aware of the fact that pollutants or other hazards could exist on those sites, and that development will have to be careful and intentional about managing or cleaning up, or certainly making sure not to further disturb those sites. So there are definitely a couple different types of categories of sites that we talk about. You know, a brownfield is kind of what we call a site that, you know, could have some development impact because of contaminants, where the Superfund refers to a specific designation and identification by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency that looks at some of the most significant contaminated sites. So you can just see here, and I think Andy and Ruby did a good job of showing this as well, that we have a couple different layers of brownfields when we talk about the area, the Barge Canal specifically, and the areas around it. But I think it's, you know, really important to note too that these sites and the identification of these contaminants does not have to preclude these sites from ever being utilized for any other purpose. I think we share a lot in common actually with Andy and Ruby when they talk about sort of the core 20 acres of the Barge Canal, the city-owned land, and some of the parcels to the west close to the railroad, and that we do have a lot of opportunity for conservation and renaturalization, and even some potential community use for exploring that natural and industrial heritage. The other sites that neighbor it, you know, have long been discussed as places where we would like to see new opportunities for jobs, for homes, for other kind of community benefits as well. And there are many state, or not many, there are state and federal programs that provide both funding and other technical resources to support property owners of brownfield sites or Superfund sites to actually help them clean them up and revitalize them so that they can be put into some kind of beneficial community use, whether that's being home to new jobs or new homes, or helping to remediate stormwater or help better manage stormwater, or a whole variety of other purposes. So I think while the city may not directly be engaged in the work of brownfield remediation on the specific sites, this is related to the idea of a zoning amendment, because some of the zoning for areas around the Barge Canal could have an impact on how feasible it is for some of these sites to be reused and for them to actually access some of the technical and financial resources available to help them clean up these properties. And then finally, again, I don't need to spend a lot of time here. I kind of talked about this already, and Andy and Ruby again did a great job talking about the Barge Canal. But just another way to visualize the existing protections that exist on the Barge Canal itself. The key, you know, Barge Canal properties that are in green in the center, as Andy and Ruby had shared, are partially owned by the city. Some are owned by private landowners, but that collection of properties are all within a zoning district today that promotes conservation and really limits the type of development that could happen on any of those parcels for anything really other than open space. We also, as part of the city's open space protection plan that was prepared in 2000, we actually mapped a lot of the significant natural resources within the city. And in the Barge Canal vicinity, you know, we have very detailed delineation of things like the wetlands that Ruby and Andy were talking about, as well as special areas that are subject to flooding, being in close proximity to the lake, and just because of the topography of this area. So we also have zoning tools that help protect those natural resource areas. And you can see this kind of gray dotted line that is around the the properties that are green in the Barge Canal. These are other areas that are where some of our natural resource zoning tools apply to. So these help us to either limit development within those areas or apply special tools to make sure that development is happening in a way that is sensitive to the natural resources that they are near. But I think, you know, for us, again, we're not proposing to change the zoning of the Barge Canal. I think we share a lot in common with Ruby and Andy that we would really love to see these properties accessible to the community, both for some recreational purposes, as well as for that learning aspect that Ruby and Andy talked a lot about. You know, we have some kind of longer term tools that we need to work closely in collaboration with our state and federal partners around. One thing in particular is that while the city does own part of that land, we don't fully have the ability to utilize it for some of these purposes that we're talking about at this time, because the property was originally purchased for the Champlain Parkway, the Southern Connector. So as that project gets underway, you know, working in close collaboration with our partners, we may be able to more fully realize the city's ownership of that property and start to implement more of that community vision for what that space could look like. So we'll continue to work with those partners as we kind of move forward from here. And also, like Ruby and Andy, would love to explore the opportunity for either public ownership or control of and ways to provide access within that Barge Canal area that is zoned for conservation today. So with that, I will stop talking so that folks can ask questions if they have them, or let Samantha, or John, or Steve jump in if there's anything I missed. But I'll just wrap up by saying we will be providing more information to all of you about a number of these things in the very near term. We wanted to come and share this sort of beginning conversation with you early on. And in the next, few weeks, we will be having a city landing page with more information about the conversation around a potential zoning amendment, and we'll share information about upcoming meetings to be part of that conversation. We'll also, as I mentioned before, you should also hear in the near term more information about the Lakeside feasibility study that will be happening at the same time. But ultimately, the purpose of the work that we will be doing over the next few months is to share some recommendations with the city's planning commission. They, as I mentioned in the housing action plan, have been tasked with helping us evaluate the possibility of this zoning amendment. And we want to share recommendations with them about how that can happen and how that should happen. So we look forward to hearing your feedback about that process as we get underway with it. And we'll also make sure to be back here as those recommendations are developed and share them with you as we move through the process. I will stop sharing my screen. And I think, Billy, if you'd like, we could answer any questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Megan. This is a great time for questions. So if people want to use the raise hand function, or if they're in the room, just raise their hand there and start chatting away. That'd be great. I see Andy has his hand up. So Andy, you can go right ahead.
Hi, Megan. Hi, Samantha. This is, I do see lots of possibilities for collaboration on, with the city on sort of the conservation vision that we have. We haven't encountered a whole lot of enthusiasm from, for instance, the Conservation Board and other bodies, because they're sort of waiting for signals from the city government that really this is something that, conservation and remediation is something that we want to go forward with and actively pursue for the Barge Canal. I wonder about thinking a different way sometimes about development, especially in this era of climate catastrophe, climate emergency, I know that the Conservation Board and others have put out this really excellent nature-based solutions to climate change document as an addendum to the Open Space Protection Plan. And, you know, thinking about development revitalization as something that involves also conserving and expanding conserved lands is something that we would like to discuss further, because of the many benefits that for instance, conserved land at the Barge Canal or the open land at the Barge Canal, the wild land at the Barge Canal in some ways already gives the city all the things besides just economic development, or even housing options that, you know, are offered by the Barge Canal. But I do have a question for you. How come some of other housing options, both in the South End and in the center of Burlington, are not more fully explored? Like, for instance, the old YMCA building. I keep going by there and thinking, a hotel? Really? I mean, why are we doing even thinking about a hotel when we have this intense need for housing? You know, the thrust of the you know, of the short-term rental ordinances that have been changed have been kind of to protect housing in Burlington. And it seems like a property like that the city should be actively pursuing that as housing rather than for you know, housing for tourists who are coming in. I also think about, I always, you know, spending time more at the Barge Canal. I've been looking at dealer.com and wondering, is that ever going to become an active office space again? And if not, couldn't that become renovated for housing? You know, thinking a little more outside of the box for some new housing options seems like it would be useful. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy, about thinking outside the box about other housing options. You know, the city doesn't act as a housing developer, but we help facilitate conversations about ways that sites in the city could be better utilized for housing. I think that's a big part of Samantha's job, actually. I'll let her speak to this a little bit more. From my perspective and my role in Burlington, you know, is really about how do we help get the policies right that will help allow those sites to be used for housing. We've put a lot of work in the last few years into trying to make housing more feasible within the downtown area. And so there are a lot of other things that we're doing, that we have been doing, and that we will be doing as well, to help try to realize the potential for housing in other places where housing has either already existed or has the potential to as well. You know, I think the question you asked about dealer.com is an interesting question that I think some of us have asked as well. This will be a part of the conversation going forward. Just what is the role of existing commercial space within the South End to either continue to be commercial or to potentially be used for different purposes like housing. You may remember that in our conversations about housing in the South End as part of the Plan BTV process, there was a lot of concern about the loss of commercial space or artist space or other spaces to housing. So we've started from the place of looking at sites that don't have development in a traditional sense, maybe on them, and what their potential might be. But I would imagine that questions like what you asked, Andy, will be asked by others as we really get into the meat of this discussion.
Thanks, Megan. And I'll just, I think, speak a little bit to the YMCA is privately owned property, which, as Megan said, the city is not in the business of housing development ourselves. So it's not a property that we have control over. I will say the CEDO office, as I think this is, you know, public news, that the private owner of that property is potentially close to being in default on their loan. And the city is very engaged in communicating with our, nonprofit and for-profit housing developers to see how we could support potentially get housing on that site. So we are always very aware of these opportunities and doing our best to support them through conversations. The city does have some sources of funding that we're able to invest into affordable housing units, and are coming at providing housing in lots of different places in lots of different ways.
I am not seeing any other hands up, but I just want to make sure I've not missed anyone. So,
Billy, I'm just going to direct it towards Steve.
oh, there we are.
That's a,
I see someone with a hand up there. Hi, Steve.
Hi. Thanks. Megan, in your last slide, there was a line that referenced something I'm not entirely clear about what it is. It's the Lakeside feasibility study. Could you remind me what that is? And you might be muted.
Yep. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so this is a project that will just be getting started, that is looking at 2 sites specifically, between a city-owned site that is on Sears Lane and a privately owned site on Lakeside Avenue. And specifically looking at the feasibility for some mixed-use development to happen on those sites that could include some sort of a regional transportation facility. This is something that the city has studied in the past, looked at the opportunity for essentially the bus terminal to be located there long before it came to downtown where it is today. But I think, related to lots of different potential funding sources that are out there right now to help facilitate public infrastructure and specifically some transportation related infrastructure, there has been some renewed interest in exploring the potential for a facility like that in this area. So this study is going to help us look into that in more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's another question from the room from John.
Just to follow up on that, my understanding is that the feasibility study, while it's related to the ongoing zoning and that proposal that's being discussed tonight, it is independent, and it's a study, I believe, that is being initiated by the Regional Planning Commission, in part, given the location of the city parcel located, directly adjacent to the proposed Champlain Parkway and an active rail line that will have Amtrak coming through next year, or later this year.
Yeah, those are great additional points, John. It is being led by the Regional Planning Commission, and several city departments will also be engaged in that. It is definitely an independent project, but very much related to the work that we're doing because it's a similar area that we're talking about. And I think, when we talk about feasibility for development in that area, especially any kind of mixed use development that could support a transit purpose as well, what is allowed there in terms of what kind of mix of uses that transit facility could be paired with is a big part of a feasibility study. So obviously the study will look at, what could happen today if the zoning is as it is, and we'll also make some considerations for what could be feasible if the zoning were to change in some way. So separate, but very much related.
Yep, agreed. Also, I just want to thank both Megan and Samantha and Andy and his crew. Very informative presentations. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the note I was just going to make is that everybody in the room is wearing green except you, John.
He's got green pants.
He's got green pants.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the Lotus.
Andy, I'm just looking to see if there are any other hands raised from people who haven't asked anything, but I do not see any other hands. So back over to you.
Oh, Andy, you're on mute.
the quick question, when the memorandum of understanding and the housing plan was announced in December, the mayor's office announced a pretty ambitious timeline for moving on the South End rezoning. That hasn't really materialized in that way, but I'm wondering what you think the timeline is in terms of especially public input opportunities in the coming months. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy, and I appreciate that. I know you've reached out a number of times just to help ask questions and share information about ways to be involved in this conversation. We have been behind the ball getting started on this based on what was in that MOU. But I would say that you can look forward to opportunities to engage in the conversation about this zoning project within the next few weeks and next couple of months for sure.
Looking to see if there are any other hands. I do have a question. One, and maybe question / comment. One term that you used a couple of times, Megan, was underutilized sites. Within this region, and I can envision parking lots fitting that definition. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I do think that there's a lot of good that can be done in repurposing some of our parking lots. But when you use the term underutilized sites, does that include some of the property that Andy was talking about? Some of those parcels that are not currently developed, but are, green space, or at least undeveloped plots at this point, because in my mind, there's a big difference between repurposing a parking lot to functional purpose versus, taking a space that's an open green space right now and, looking to incentivize building there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we were talking about, underutilized and undeveloped sites, we were really talking about both of those things that you just asked about, Billy. Definitely the parking lots are always an easy thing for us to look to in terms of, just seeing tons of potential. With undeveloped sites, I think, the two parcels in particular that are closest to Pine Street that are not in the conservation zoning district are ones that have long been part of, decades ago kind of planning work, that have always imagined that there could be some sort of new development that could occur there. So those two parcels are also included there. Not because we're proposing to change any area that's conservation already to some other development purpose, but just looking at areas that have been part of zoning districts that would allow development to happen, but where it hasn't happened previously.
I'm going to point it back towards the room and then just kind of looking at the time. I think maybe this will be the last question on this, but I would say
just to add on to what Megan just said, I think that when looking at the proposed innovation zoning district, I believe it includes some properties, for example, on the south side of Sears Lane, and which include single-story warehouses. So it's underutilized properties could include some properties that have a structure on them, but that could be redeveloped with a change in use. I mean, I think it's bears repeating, even though it seems obvious, that we're in the midst of a housing crisis, and that we're really trying here in Burlington, as well as other parts of the state, to provide housing for just a wide range of folks that currently can't have housing or don't have housing. So it's I think that's really kind of what's driving it, and trying to do it in a way that really kind of supports all the values and goals that we all hold dear.
No, thank you, John. And I would say, Nate, that I think because we're not, Andy, we still are not going to have Tiff and Gabrielle, and so I think we can stretch this just a little bit, because I think it's a fruitful conversation. On that point of housing, the one other point I wanted to make was just, there is an uncomfortable background to all this, at least in my mind, in that we're talking about this desperate need for housing in this area and the housing crisis. Meanwhile, we the city by, put blame wherever you wish. The Sears Lane encampment is no longer what it was, wherever it was before, a place of real housing. So, one question / comment I have is, how are we going to be developing this in a way for truly inclusive housing? I'm always concerned when we're seeing development of this. I'm somebody who worked in the seaport in Boston for a while, which had grand visions of equitable development and has since turned into a playground for the rich and famous. And I am concerned that development not done in the right way that can lead to some. I mean, and we're doing this by having these sort of conversations, but making sure that the development is done in an inclusive manner that recognizes that we need housing of all types in here, and that can't just be market based.
Absolutely. And I think just going back to something that John said, and I think even something that Andy said earlier, is about that we're really hoping to accomplish in the exploration of this zoning amendment is how we can use housing as a potential catalyst or tool for more impactful, sustainable, resilient neighborhood within the South End. So we've talked about the parking lots, certainly not the highest and best use of our land anywhere in the city. The building that folks are sitting in today could potentially have housing on top of it, could continue to serve the exact same purpose that it serves as a community gathering space, city offices, and could include housing. And I think going to your question, Billy, and something Andy said early on about the brownfields sites, while they're not as obvious as a asphalt parking lot, is something that we know we would like to do something different with. I do believe that there's potential, if there is, we can work closely with private property owners and smartly with our policy, that some portion of development on those sites could open up and preserve the rest of the sites for conservation and for public access. So it's trying to, how do we balance all of these things creatively to get the best results? And again, I think as Megan stated on one of the first slides, a more resilient community.
Yeah, and I'll just add to, a part of the city zoning ordinance that applies to new housing development is our inclusionary zoning ordinance as well, which does require when new housing is built that some percentage of those units are built meeting certain affordability standards. But then I think beyond just the policy tools, one of the things that we're having some conversations about is, how do we use some of the collective power of folks that own property or have other resources to bring to the table that could help go beyond that as well. So, I don't want to speak for any of the affordable housing developers that aren't here, but, talking to them as well about what ways they could potentially help to facilitate inclusive development in this area.
Well, thank you so much, Megan and Samantha, and for everyone who's participated. I want to just do one more check over to see if there are any other hands raised that I've missed. I do not see any, so I think we will move on to our next agenda item, but thank you so much.
Great, thank you all. Thanks for the questions and for the time tonight.
Thank you.
All right, and our next agenda item is to one I'm very excited for, which is to introduce our new city councilor for this area. I'm having some internet connectivity issues on my end. Are other people having that, or?
It's okay on our end.
John, okay on yours? Okay. Well, then I'll stop talking to get it over to Ben Travers, our new city councilor-elect.
Ben, before you take the floor, I'm going to steal your thunder and just ask anybody that is on Zoom that is wearing green and that would like to be entered into the aforementioned drawing, raise your hand, use the raise hand function. And I can take your name down. And now I'll give it to Ben.
All right, well, I know it's 8:30 and I don't want to spend too much time between this and the raffle. Thanks, Billy, for turning it over to me. I guess this is my last meeting as a member of the Ward 5 NPA Steering Committee. I've been on the steering committee for 5 years now. And it's been a real honor and a privilege to work with you all on the steering committee, as well as to meet with the community. I think that we've done a lot of good work on the NPA here over the last 5 years. Andy, working with you in particular, I think you and I are the two most senior members on the steering committee now, and it's been a real privilege working with you and the other folks here to take on new efforts like the outdoor movie we did a couple of years ago, and the block parties that we got started last year, and really trying to find new ways. And I think, I trust this group is going to sort of take it to new levels. I'm excited by the new folks and echo sort of the call to volunteers that you put out there in the beginning for new steering committee members. I'm also really grateful to Ward 5 neighbors for electing me to the city council on town meeting day. I will take Chip Mason's seat on April 4th, and really intend on staying tuned into these NPAs and to coming. I think that they're really important. And I think that as we talk about issues like housing, like rezoning, neighborhood and community input, and ensuring that those decisions appropriately reflect community values are very important to me. And I think they're going to be very important to these decisions being in the best interest of the city. So I look forward to hopefully continuing to rely on the NPA, as well as finding other ways to connect with the community, and certainly individually. I do have my city email address set up already. So it'll be btravers@burlingtonvt.gov. And I'll drop in, there is no chat, but in the minutes, my cell phone number will be up on the city website as well, which is 357-2055. And certainly would always love to hear from you all about your concerns and your questions. I will say that I think that the city over the coming year has a lot of big issues that it's going to have to tackle. I was excited that on town meeting day, the infrastructure bond passed. I think there's a number of really critical items in there for the city's capital infrastructure. I was concerned, particularly as the former chair of the Parks Commission, there's a good amount of funds in there for continued development and growth of our parks and playgrounds. I was concerned when that bond, although certainly understood the reasons why it failed in December. I was excited that the pared down version passed on town meeting day. I met with DPW earlier this week or last week, and I know with that capital infrastructure bond in place that they have some really ambitious goals for the coming year with respect to our roads and our sidewalks and our bike lanes, as well as additional improvements to our water system and stormwater system. So was excited to hear about that. We did, however, have a failed budget. And I think there's a couple reasons why. I think we can always wonder whether the ballot item could have been communicated better to the public. But I think perhaps even more so than that, our city is very concerning for me, becoming increasingly unaffordable. I think that Ward 5 in particular sort of bore the brunt of the reassessment, and folks felt property tax increases already as a result of that quite significantly. And there's a lot of questions about what the future of our high school is. It was in the afternoon when I was standing out at the polls on town meeting day when a text message and email and phone call went out to the Burlington School District community with the price tag, potential price tag on a new high school. I was sort of wondering, why did they send this out on town meeting day of all days? But there it was, of $200 million plus. And the city council and the school board, I know that my fellow NPA steering committee member, I don't think Lucia is here, but I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with Lucia and collaborating with her to figure out how is Vermont's biggest city going to get a high school back, and how are we going to deal with the city's budgetary needs. That failed budget, a good amount of that money would have gone to staff for the city. The city, like a lot of industries, is struggling to recruit and retain folks. And so I know the city is going to have to be figuring out, particularly considering inflation and cost of living, what are we going to do from a budgetary standpoint for city staff, for city projects, as well as for the high school. But I think we have a lot of opportunities here, and certainly I'm excited to dig into it. I think that this meeting has touched on some of the other bigger issues that we'll be discussing as well: rezoning, housing, and not just housing for folks, for renters or for homeowners, but also for those who are unhoused. I'm excited by a lot of the steps the city plans on taking here in the short to long-term future. We've heard some news as of late about shelter pods that they're thinking about doing, as well as putting a lot of additional resources into more short-term and long-term stable housing. And so I'm excited to be leaning in on that as well. But could go on. Certainly would be happy to hear from folks about any concerns or thoughts they have, or to answer questions. I will acknowledge that I haven't quite started yet, so certainly we'll be digging into it soon enough, but happy to answer any preliminary questions folks have if we have the time, but also recognize it's 8:40 and there's a raffle to get to.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate that. I think the hands that are raised right now are for the raffle and not to ask a question. Although if you do want to ask a question and have your hand raised, let me know. How would you let me know? I guess.
Lower your hand.
I can ask a question from the room. Ben, I know you mentioned that it's definitely the early stages and you're not even in the job yet, but it seems like when folks end up on the council day, we'll kind of take on a particular issue or project that kind of ends up being something that they end up working a lot on. Do you have a sense of anything that you'd kind of like to take on as a project in your first term? Well, that suddenly sounded like a question at a debate, but yeah.
Well, thanks for that question, Nate. It's clear from the presentation that we just saw that the city believes that the South End can play a special role in addressing the city's housing needs. And so certainly as the representative from Ward 5, I feel a great deal of responsibility to represent our community and to ensure that folks have more than a full and fair opportunity to weigh in with respect to that issue. I trust and know that the meeting that we had tonight should be the first of many to come. The other thing I'll say is that the boards and commissions I've served on are near and dear to my heart. I would love to explore ways for the NPA to have a larger role. When I started on the NPA, our annual budget was $500. It's gone to $2,500 since we started, and I think the NPA has been able to do a ton of great work with still a relatively limited budget. And I'd like to explore how much more the NPA can do, as well as my time on the Parks Commission. So the parks, I have 3 kids near and dear to our hearts as well, and would really like to be a champion for our parks on the council.
Thanks, Ben. I'm also seeing a hand raised that Jane Henley has a hand raised. Jane, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, wanted to know, climate change keeps making things worse, and what change are there going to have to be further infrastructure changes as the rains increase, as the snows increase? It's like I feel like I have to fear every single day, single day. Like what new extreme will the weather keep bringing? Is the budget does the budget keep increasing every year with all the salt that gets, the snow plowing? Did the failed budget include such things in there. I mean, yeah, how is the city preparing for for worse climate change? Do you know?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Jane. I think that there's folks who could really speak at length. We could probably do a whole NPA on what the city's looking to do with respect to addressing climate change. I will say one of the reasons I'm excited that the capital infrastructure bond passed is that does include money for public works, including our water system. I mean, I've seemed to have noticed that we seem to have more and more water main breaks every winter. The roads seem to be in more and more terrible shape at the end of each winter. DPW will tell you that this is because of temperature shifts, like you noted. It's cold one day, it's 60 degrees the next day, then it's freezing the day after that. I know that the infrastructure monies that are there are going to allow for quite a bit of paving and improvements to our sidewalks. But the part that I'm most excited about, you don't really see it with your eyes, but I think we'll see it in that we'll have fewer water main breaks, is there's some really significant improvements that are planned for the water system and relining pipes, as well as making some needed improvements to the wastewater plant and stormwater. All these city projects, the Great Streets project for Main Street that passed includes a lot of stormwater improvements to Main Street. You see it on St. Paul as well. Some of the new in the South End plans for our parks like Callahan Park and Perkins Pier include a lot of stormwater improvements. So those are just a couple of areas that you touched on that I know are still in the cards and we're supported by that infrastructure bond. And so I'm excited about those pieces. A lot to do though.
Great, thank you so much. And just doing one more look to see if there's any other hands up. And seeing none, I think we can transition to our last matter of the night, which is the raffle draw.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's see if I can get it up. All right. Can you all see my screen in 1 second? All right. So this is the list of all the folks that I have noticed are wearing green or have told me that they're wearing green. If you do not see yourself and you are, please raise your hand now. And if anybody, while I'm in share screen mode, I can't quite make out if anybody.
There is one other name, Pat Rivers.
All right. Okay. So I'm just going to randomize this, and basically what it'll ultimately do is it'll give a ranking of all the people. It doesn't have anything to do with your ranking of how green you are. It's just the top 2 will get a gift card, and we'll collect some information and figure out a way to do that. So on the count of 3, I'm going to press this randomize button. I'm just kidding. I didn't count 3. All right. So it looks like the top 2 folks are Christy Mitchell and Ruby Perry. So congratulations to Christy and Ruby. And yeah, we'll figure out how to get you a gift card. Thanks for coming out tonight. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. And Bill, you want the last word to wrap things up?
Sure. Thank you all for coming out. And yes, we'll look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Hopefully more and more in person. Have a great night.
Thanks, you too. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.